Hi, students. Welcome, future logicians. This is an introduction to logic course. I'm Professor M, and I'm going to begin by presenting the ground rules for rational inquiry and discussion. Also, the steps for effective critical commentary. First, I'm going to start off with just an explanation of some reasons why one might want to study logic. And then we'll engage in the rules of rational discussion. So, how to rationally discuss with one another, as well as how to rationally inquire. Let's just start with personal motivation for studying logic. So, how would logic help you personally? Well, first, logic helps anyone express reasoning well. And by doing that, allows you to present your own argument or your own side or your own case. For example, you can imagine a situation in which, say, you're a nurse and you made a decision about a patient. Learning logic helps you be able to express why you made that decision when you made that decision well. Okay. It also allows you to know what evidence actually supports your decision. So before you're presenting your argument to others, you are making a decision internally yourself, and logic helps you make better decisions. It helps socially as well. It helps you defend your money, your reputation, the decisions you make in the world. It helps you defend your family and your friends' reputation. All of these things come from being able to reason well and express that reasoning well. The reasoning well part is really crucial. It helps you make better decisions, solve problems well, and live authentically. Now, a lot of people might think that logic is cold, aloof, calculating, unempathetic, and I want to convince you in this lecture that it's none of those things. In fact, if it's anything, it's defense against the dark arts. And for me, the dark arts are the arts of trying to persuade or convince somebody in order to present what is false as what is true, what is true as what is false, or in inference to allow poor inferences to appear as good inferences. So, what we call fallacious reasoning, defective reasoning, either by content or by form. So, logic isn't unempathetic. In fact, empathy is one of the major components of rationally discussing things, is to recognize the equality of humanity and the equality of the positions offered as well. So logic isn't just good personally, it's also good for everyone generally. It promotes the general good by treating people equally, respectfully, and authentically. It raises the level of discussion and the level of thinking. It focuses what people talk about on the quality of the reasoning itself instead of on the form or on the presentation or how loud somebody presents it or any other, say, aesthetic or irrelevant criteria for analyzing it. It helps people avoid false beliefs. False beliefs should be avoided. They blur our moral vision and often lead to considerable harm to others. Logic leads to innovation, discovery, better computing, better communications, better everything that has to do with figuring out how things fit in reasoning. It respects the highest standards of human thinking, and truth and justice deserve preserving. What logic does is it tries to focus on truth preservation and inference. So if somebody is arguing, if the premises are true, does that imply that the conclusion is likely or certainly true? Okay, so that's what logic and rational discussion and rational inquiry are always about, is trying to preserve the truth. Justice also deserves preserving. Humans are morally considered equal. Okay. And thus, when we are presenting arguments to each other, we treat each other as equal participants in rational discussion. We do not treat others hierarchically in logic. We also treat ourselves as fairly as we treat others instead of preserving ourselves as more important than others. So what we'll be using is this book here. Here I have my version of it, which is T. Edward Damer's Rules of Rational Discussion, which are presented in his textbook, Attacking Faulty Reasoning, a Practical Guide to Fallacy-Free Arguments. We'll particularly return to this when we talk about fallacies in a few lectures forward. So the ethical foundations, again, of inquiry are be just and earnestly seek the truth. So in order to do this, this is the way that he conceptualizes it. These offer ground rules for educated, rational people from around the world. Okay, so I'm a logician, so I like to, and an ethicist, so I like to work on philosophical problems. And the problems that I work on are problems that are problems worldwide in whatever language and whatever way of thinking they present themselves. Okay. So when I'm working on something, I'm not just working with people who speak English, for example. Many of the people I work with in logic speak Finnish, okay, and live in like Hong Kong or something. And the people who I work with on the ethicist things live around the world, working on very different projects on virtue ethics. So some are Confucian, some are Aristotelian. So basically, we want a framework for operating where we can come to conclusions that are true without being biased, without presenting false beliefs. And the way to get to this is to have a set of ground rules for how to operate to preserve the truth and to preserve justice. So rules of rational discussion require following both a code of intellectual conduct. So each one of us have to obey ground rules of how we present and behave in rational discussion. We can think of this as just like if you went to the DMV and you weren't getting something you wanted out of the person who's attending, okay, the customer service rep, you wouldn't then start a fist fight with them. That would not be a rational discussion. Okay, you wouldn't yell at them because that, again, isn't going to engage rationality. Okay, it's only operating on emotionality and force, which aren't rational ways to behave. They don't preserve truth, and they certainly don't preserve justice. It also requires rules of good inquiry. So the idea here is that if you're inquiring towards what is true, so let's say I'm doing a scientific experiment, I'm trying to test drugs for cancer. I can't just want to prove that I'm right. I have to be willing to prove that I'm wrong as well to make sure that I don't create something that is a poor chain of reasoning, poor chain of discovery, and then offer something up to the market, for example, that doesn't do anything and gives people false hope for preserving life. Ultimately, what we're doing here with rules of rational discussion is preserving life and preserving beneficence or doing no harm as well to others. So we want to just think about it in terms of its ethical basis. So now, how do we do rules of rational discussion? Well, there's a three-stage presentation that I'm going to present for it. It's a little different from the way Damer does it if you do read his book. But in stage one, we're going to start with how to do mental prep. Okay. And there's two people in any discussion. Okay. So first, we want to talk about what the person who is going to present the argument, what steps they have to do to prepare their own mind. Okay. And basically the rules they have to absorb and behave by. And then we have to do for the person who's listening, the audience, what they must also prepare their mind for. Okay, so I'm going to read these as really general aphorisms, like short aphorisms, and then I'm going to read them one by one their actual totality. So fallibilism is just the ability for something to be false. The principle of fallibilism just wants you to be able to say, I could be wrong. Okay. Others could be wrong. Normally, people don't have a problem with accepting that. But often people don't want to say or even contend that they could be wrong. I'm going to say that psychologically, that's often because of the second rule, which is truth seeking. This is about authentically seeking the truth and authentically trying to present the truth. So people who are very deeply attached to presenting the truth often have a harder time with fallibilism and vice versa, but they work together. We can think of fallibilism as just Socratic belief that there is always a limit to one's knowledge. So for whatever position one could have, there could be things that one doesn't even know, that one doesn't know. And thus accepting this is the way to earnestly seek the truth as far as falsification goes. As far as truth seeking goes, the goal has to be to discover the truth, not to, for example, win an argument socially or personally. The burden of proof, what I contend is on me to prove. Okay, so the burden of proof is on the arguer. If the arguer is making an argument, they have to give enough evidence to support that. They can't just say, I don't know, my least favorite burden of proof example, when somebody sort of shoves it off on the next person, is rhetorical questions. So if somebody says, I don't know, the environmental damage caused by pollution from coal burning smokestacks, is demonstrably smaller than it was 25 years ago. Okay, so let's say that that's what somebody contends to be the case. Well, the burden of proving that is not on the person listening. Okay, if somebody is contending that to be the case, then they have to give the evidence to support that claim. Now, the principle of charity is I must give the fairest interpretation. So when you're listening, you can't just be sort of messing with the singular premises and trying to find how corrupt and weird it is or think about it in a biased way. You have to give the fairest interpretation of the reasoning that the person is presenting. So here are the official forms of them. I'm only going to read the first part, but I want you to read yourself the whole rest of it. So pause for yourself and read it. But I'm just going to say, when alternative positions on any disputed issue are under review, each participant in the discussion should acknowledge that possibly none of the positions presented is deserving of acceptance. Okay, at best one. And therefore, it is possible that thorough examination of the issue will reveal that one's own initial position is a false or indefensible one. So let me just say one simple thing about this. These words are better than I love you to the people around you. Okay, if you just ever admit that you were wrong, that they were right, even better. That is more social glue than I love you. Okay, because they know that you love them, but they would love to hear every once in a while that they've made a point. Okay. Truth seeking, each participant should be committed to the task of earnestly searching for the truth. What this entails is one, being willing to examine alternative positions seriously. So authentically looking at, well, maybe you're right, or maybe this is right. To look for insights in the position of others and allow other participants to present arguments and, importantly, to raise objections to any position held. This is without regard to any position on the disputed issues. So that's truth seeking. Burden of proof. The burden of proof for any position rests on the participant who sets forth the position. If and when an opponent asks, the proponent should provide an argument for that position. So if somebody says something is true, then they have the burden of presenting evidence to support that contended claim. Now, the listener's responsibility. The principle of charity is if a participant's argument is reformulated by an opponent, it should be expressed in the strongest possible version that is consistent with the original intention of the arguer. If there's any question about that intention or about any implicit parts of the argument should be given the benefit of a doubt in the reformulation. Okay, so the benefit of the doubt is crucial to the principle of charity. So I want you to think for yourself, which values underlie each principle? Treat reasoning and people equally, or seek the truth authentically. So for the principle of fallibilism, which value or values underlies the principle? What about truth seeking, principle of charity, and burden of proof? So the next stage is what we expect of the expression of reasoning itself. Okay, so when people are talking back and forth, whenever anybody is formulating an expression of reasoning, there's a standard for that expression. So the first part is about the intellectual code of conduct, how people prepare themselves to rationally discuss. This is about the presentation of the material. So the expression of reasoning must be clear, relevant, acceptable, and altogether sufficient for supporting the conclusion with an effective rebuttal to objections and concerns. Okay, so this is the ideal way, right? The ideal standard for a good expression of reasoning. So let's start with the clarity principle. Be clear. Okay, that's my short version of the clarity principle. I'll give you the Damer version. The formulation of all positions, defenses, and attacks should be free of any linguistic confusion and clearly separated from other positions and issues. Relevance is next. One who presents an argument for or against a position should attempt to set forth only reasons that are directly related to the position, to the merit of the position at issue. Okay, so don't go off topic. Stay on topic. We'll be learning throughout this course how to focus on what is the topic, what is the subject of a statement, and what are the claims being made about that subject. Next is acceptability. When it presents an argument for or against position, should attempt to use reasons that are mutually acceptable to the participants. Now this is a college level course. I'm an academic. We're talking about academic inquiry. The mutually acceptable is to scholars, okay, and to any undergraduate or graduate student, anyone with an education at this level. There are standard acceptable positions, okay, and they have to meet the standard criteria of acceptability. For the sufficiency principle, the one who presents an argument for or against the position should attempt to provide reasons that are enough to give the requisite support. So enough, there has to be enough, a certain number. I know this sounds weird, but if I'm giving for example, a moral argument about a hotly disputed topic, okay, I can't just give one moral principle and say, oh, this works, therefore you should accept this. Okay, I would have to give mutual supporting premises and principles in order to argue enough support to give a sufficient number of premises and number of principles to give enough support for a hotly contested argument, for example. They'd have to be the appropriate kind. I'm going to use moral reasoning again. Moral reasoning requires both moral reasons and factual reasons to get a moral conclusion. So those are different kinds of reasons. Okay, so sufficiency also makes you look at what types of reasons would be enough to support the type of conclusion. Finally, the weight. Some claims have more bearing or weight Okay, they cover more scope, for example, than other claims. Okay, so we need to adjust how much evidence we give to the and what is enough to support the acceptance of the conclusion. Okay, and this is altogether enough. For the rebuttal principle, this just says if one presents an argument for or against a position, you should attempt to provide an effective rebuttal to all serious challenges. Okay, and there are often well-known or objections or well-known challenges to different positions. So if there is particularly a well-known objection or challenge, you should build in a good argument. You should build in a rebuttal to that challenge. Or the position it supports, and to the strongest argument on the other side of the issue. Okay, so if it's not a particular objection straight to the argument, if there's a contending argument, then the best types of reasoning give a rebuttal to that contended argument. So match the principle to the problems and expressions of reasoning. So clarity, relevance, effective rebuttal, sufficiency, and acceptability. And here are the possible problems in the expression of reasoning. A, not good evidence. B, weak support. C, vague or imprecise evidence. D, no responses to objections. So if you're not sure, go back and go over the different parts of the stage 2 for rules of rational discussion. Finally, the end game. We're not going to spend a lot of time here because logic is primarily interested in the stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 3 has to do with more often social problems and solutions. So at the end of it, the goal of rational discussion is to resolve, reconsider, or suspend judgment. Resolve, the two people agree on a course of action, a policy, a decision. Okay. Reconsider, they take the arguments that they've looked at, they realize they need to do more research, and they need to reconsider the possible disputed positions. Or suspend judgment. They don't have enough evidence, and maybe there's no way to get enough evidence, so you hold judgment on that disputed topic. So we're going to use T. Edward Dahmer's standard here for rules of rational discussion to present his standard here for a good argument. Okay? It must be structurally well-formed. The premises must be relevant, acceptable, and altogether sufficient. Finally, there must be an effective rebuttal of challenges to the argument. So for each one of these, I want you to tell me which principle is implied by the comment made by the arguer. Okay? I could be wrong, but 2, your argument is very good. I'll agree with your position. So which rules of rational discussion are each of these comments seeming to use? Neither of our arguments are great, so let's agree to not decide yet. 4, I'll stick to the topic. 5, I will use direct, specific language in my reasoning. So which principle is implied by each of these different phrases? Finally, I want to go over Dennett's rules of effective critical commentary. So Daniel Dennett puts these up as a way for a person who, when listening to an argument, responds properly and is able to properly convey critical commentary. Now, I want to first start by saying every argument doesn't need critical commentary. Sometimes it's good to listen to reasoning and to realize that you accept the reasoning and that it's good reasoning. Okay. Nowadays, it's often sort of overblown, this affection for destroying people's reasoning. And I just want to say that doesn't always work very well. You want to not just think about arguing against things, but you also want to think about arguing for things. Okay, sometimes I think about it as like mixed martial art. Okay, you can't just go on offense in mixed martial arts. You also have to be able to defend your position. Okay, so ideally, you're good at both parts of that. You're good at creating arguments and sufficiently supporting things with good evidence. Okay, but you're also good at rebutting, coming up with objections, looking at counterexamples, looking at things and seeing if they don't exactly fit. So before you even do critical commentary, ask, does this need to happen? Is this important to the conversation? Does it progress rational discussion when I bring up critical commentary? Okay, so say you're committed, you want to bring up critical commentary. Very first, the rule is re-express your peer's position clearly, vividly, and fairly. Dennett wants you to do it so clearly, vividly, and fairly that the other person is enchanted by the way that you've reconstructed their argument. They agree with it completely, and you've done a fair interpretation. Okay? Remember, this is principle charity. Next, you're going to list any points of agreement. Then you're going to state something you have learned from their expression of reasoning or from the reasoning itself. Okay? Then and only then, after steps 1, 2, and 3, may you offer an objection, a criticism of the reasoning, or a rebuttal to the reasoning. So those are the steps for critical commentary to be effective. I'm going to leave you off in just some things to think about for yourself and in the way that you conduct yourself intellectually, in particular, looking at intellectual virtues. Okay? So the ones that I want to concentrate on are the ones that revolve around rational inquiry and rational discussion. So first, fairness. Okay? So humility, fair-mindedness, and empathy are all virtues of the major virtue type of fairness. Some have to do with truth, like honesty, authenticity, integrity, and conscientiousness. Some have to do with interpersonal strength, like being a good sportsman, actively listening, being civil in discussion, peace-seeking, and being solution-oriented. Next is a respectful disposition. Being respectful to each other, being dignified oneself, and being encouraging to each other. Finally, for what you're talking about, what is the cognitive breadth and depth of that? So how deeply are you discussing a topic? How widely, or what is the breadth of discussion? So discernment, observation, reflectiveness, analytical mindedness, and curiosity are all aspects of that. So reflect upon yourself as a person who expresses reasoning. Which rules do you use regularly, and what are your intellectual virtues? Which should you use more, and what are your intellectual vices? Create an illustration, an example, a demonstration of how you in your personal life, your virtues manifest, to show your peers how you think or inquire.